My stepfather William has always treated my wife Jessica like she wasn't part of the family, but what he did at our wedding reception crossed every line imaginable. He handed out custom Rolex watches to all the men in the family, my brothers, cousins, even distant relatives. But when Jessica asked where hers was, he looked her dead in the eye and said, "These are for blood family only, sweetheart." The humiliation on her face will haunt me forever. I stood up and gave him 48 hours to sincerely apologize or get out of our lives permanently. Now half the family is calling me an ungrateful son, but I refuse to let anyone disrespect my wife. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel's Crystal Ballroom had never looked more beautiful. 300 guests filled the elegant space, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables decorated with white roses and gold accents. It was supposed to be the perfect ending to the perfect day, our wedding day. Jessica looked absolutely radiant in her designer gown, her auburn hair cascading over her shoulders as she laughed with my cousin Sarah about something silly that had happened during the ceremony. I was standing near the bar, finally able to breathe after 6 months of wedding planning stress, when I saw William Mitchell, my stepfather of 15 years, approaching the head table with a large wooden box under his arm. He had that particular smile on his face, the one he wore when he was about to make some grand gesture that would ensure all attention was focused on him. "Ladies and gentlemen," William announced, tapping his champagne glass with a knife to get everyone's attention. "If I could have a moment of your time, I have something special I'd like to share with the family." The conversations around the room gradually died down as 300 pairs of eyes turned toward William. He was in his element, a successful real estate developer who owned half of downtown Portland. He was used to commanding attention. At 62, he still cut an imposing figure in his custom-tailored tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built a small empire from nothing. "Today, we celebrate not just David and Jessica's union," he began, his voice carrying across the ballroom, "but also the continuation of our family legacy. The Mitchell name has meant something in the city for over 40 years, and today we welcome a new generation into that legacy." I felt a small knot forming in my stomach. Something about his tone seemed off, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what. "As some of you know," William continued, "my father, God rest his soul, started Mitchell Development with nothing but a pickup truck and a dream. Today, we own over 200 properties across Oregon and Washington. This success belongs to all of us, to the Mitchell family." He opened the wooden box with a theatrical flourish, revealing 12 identical black velvet cases nestled in custom foam padding. Even from 30 feet away, I could see the distinctive crown logo embossed on each case. "Rolex Submariner watches," William announced proudly, "custom engraved with the Mitchell family crest and each recipient's initials. These represent our bond as a family, our shared legacy, and our commitment to each other." The room buzzed with excitement. Several of my male relatives had already started moving toward the head table, anticipating their names being called. "First, for my son David," William said, picking up one of the cases, "the man of the hour who's made me proud every single day since I became his father." I walked up to accept the watch, feeling the weight of the expensive timepiece in my hands. The engraving was beautiful. DMM with the date and Mitchell family legacy inscribed below. It was an incredibly generous gift, probably worth $15,000. "Thank you, William," I said, genuinely touched. "This is amazing." "For my son Michael," he continued, calling up my younger brother, then my older brother James, then my cousins Tyler, Brandon, and Kevin. My uncles Robert and Thomas, even my second cousin Alex, who I saw maybe twice a year at family gatherings. One by one, the men in our family received their watches. Each presentation was accompanied by a brief speech about that person's contributions to the family legacy. The crowd applauded after each name, clearly impressed by the extravagance of the gesture. As the ceremony continued, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Jessica was still sitting at our table, watching the proceedings with a confused smile on her face. She was the only woman not being called forward, but more importantly, she was clearly expecting her name to be announced at some point. After all, she was now a Mitchell too. She just legally changed her name 4 hours ago during our ceremony. She'd been part of our family gatherings for 3 years, had spent countless holidays with us, had even helped William plan his surprise birthday party for my mother last year. "And finally," William said, his voice taking on that particular tone he used when he wanted to sound magnanimous, "for my grandson Tommy, who at 16 is already showing the entrepreneurial spirit that built this family's success." He handed the last watch to my brother Michael's teenage son, who beamed as he accepted the expensive gift. The applause died down, and I waited for William to call Jessica forward, but instead he closed the empty wooden box and began to return to his seat. That's when Jessica stood up. "Excuse me, William," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the now quiet ballroom. Her cheeks were flushed, but she maintained her composure. "I think there might have been a mistake. You didn't call my name." The silence that followed was deafening. 300 people watching as my new wife stood there in her wedding dress, clearly confused and hurt, while my stepfather looked at her with barely concealed irritation. "Oh, sweetie," William said, his voice dripping with condescension. "These watches are for blood family only. Mitchell blood. You understand." The words hit the room like a physical blow. I watched my wife's face crumble, her confident smile replaced by a look of pure humiliation. Her hands were trembling as she slowly sank back into her chair, her eyes filling with tears she was desperately trying not to shed. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. 300 people witnessing my wife being publicly excluded and humiliated by the man who was supposed to welcome her into our family. Some guests were looking down at their plates, clearly uncomfortable. Others were staring openly, probably wondering how this situation would resolve itself. But what broke my heart was seeing Jessica trying to hold herself together, trying to smile through the devastating rejection, trying to pretend that what had just happened was somehow acceptable. That's when I stood up. "Actually, William," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "there was a mistake. A big one." Every eye in the room turned to me. I could feel the tension crackling like electricity as I walked toward the head table where William was still standing, the empty wooden box in his hands. "You see, everyone," I said, addressing the room while keeping my eyes locked on William, "Jessica became a Mitchell 4 hours ago. She's not just some girlfriend or casual acquaintance. She's my wife. She's family." William's face had gone pale, but he maintained his composure. "David, this isn't the time or place for—" "You're absolutely right," I interrupted. "This isn't the time or place. The time and place for you to welcome my wife into our family was months ago when we got engaged. The time and place was when she spent her own money helping plan your birthday party. The time and place was during any of the dozens of family gatherings she's attended over the past 3 years." I turned to address the room directly. "My wife, Jessica, has shown nothing but love and respect to this family since the day I brought her home. She's helped plan events, she's been there for family emergencies, she's treated everyone here with kindness and generosity. And today, on our wedding day, she was publicly humiliated and excluded by the man who's supposed to be welcoming her into our family." William's jaw was clenched tight, his hands gripping the wooden box so hard his knuckles were white. "David, you're making a scene. This is not." "A scene?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "William, you just told my wife in front of 300 people that she's not really family. You just told everyone here that the Mitchell name and legacy are more important than basic human decency. If anyone made a scene, it was you." I walked over to Jessica, who was still sitting in stunned silence, tears finally starting to flow down her cheeks. I took her hand and helped her stand. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the room, "I'd like you all to meet Jessica Mitchell, my wife, my partner, and the most important person in my world. She doesn't need a fancy watch to prove she's part of this family because unlike some people, she understands that family is about love, not bloodlines." The applause that followed was uncertain, scattered. Some people were clapping enthusiastically, Jessica's family and friends and some of my younger cousins. Others remained silent, clearly unsure how to navigate this unprecedented family drama. William's face had turned red with anger and embarrassment. "How dare you?" he hissed, stepping closer to me. "How dare you disrespect me like this in front of everyone? After everything I've done for you, after everything I've given you." "Everything you've given me?" I repeated. "William, you married my mother when I was 12 years old. You've been a good stepfather, and I've always appreciated that. But don't confuse providing for me with owning me. And don't think that your generosity gives you the right to humiliate my wife." "She's not Mitchell blood," William said through gritted teeth. "She doesn't understand what this family has built, what we represent." "You're right," I said. "She doesn't understand cruelty disguised as tradition. She doesn't understand using family legacy as an excuse to exclude people. She doesn't understand how someone can spend 3 years pretending to accept her and then publicly reject her on the most important day of her life." I turned back to the room. "I want to make something very clear to everyone here. Jessica and I are leaving. We're going to finish our honeymoon as planned, and when we come back, we're going to build our life together surrounded by people who actually understand what family means." I looked directly at William. "You have 48 hours to decide what kind of man you want to be. You can apologize to my wife, sincerely and publicly, for the humiliation you just put her through, or you can continue to prioritize your precious bloodline over basic human decency. But understand this, if you choose the latter, you'll never see or hear from us again." William's eyes flashed with anger. "You're making a mistake, David. You're throwing away your family for some girl you've known for 3 years. "No, William," I said, putting my arm around Jessica's shoulders. "I'm choosing my family, my real family, the person who stands by me, who loves me unconditionally, who makes me want to be a better man every single day. That's what family actually is." I guided Jessica toward the exit, but before we left, I turned back one final time. 48 hours, William. Use them wisely. We walked out of that ballroom hand in hand, leaving behind 300 stunned guests and one very angry stepfather. The aftermath began before we even reached our hotel room. My phone started buzzing before we got to the elevator. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails. By the time we reached our suite, I had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Jessica sat on the edge of the bed, still in her wedding dress, staring at her hands. She hadn't said a word since we left the reception. "Jess," I said softly, sitting beside her. "Talk to me." She looked up, her mascara slightly smudged despite her best efforts to hold back tears. "Did I do something wrong?" she whispered. "Did I somehow give him the impression that I wasn't worthy?" My heart broke over again. "No," I said firmly, taking her hands in mine. "You did absolutely nothing wrong. You've been nothing but gracious and loving toward my family since day one. This is about William's issues, not yours." "But maybe he's right," she continued, her voice getting smaller. "Maybe I don't understand what it means to be a Mitchell. Maybe I don't deserve." "Stop," I interrupted. "Jessica, look at me. You are the most deserving person I know. You work 60 hours a week as a pediatric nurse. You volunteer at the animal shelter on weekends. You send care packages to my grandmother every month just because you know it makes her happy. If anyone doesn't deserve to be part of this family, it's the man who could look at someone like you and find her lacking." She leaned against my shoulder and I felt some of the tension leave her body. I've never been rejected like that. Not so publicly, not so cruelly. And on our wedding day, I held her close, feeling the anger toward William burning in my chest like acid. "He's going to apologize," I said, "or he's going to lose a son." My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother calling. I declined the call, but she immediately called back. "I should probably answer this," I told Jessica. "David." My mother's voice was frantic the moment I picked up. "What happened? William is furious. Half the family is taking sides, and your grandmother is having chest pains from the stress. You need to come back and fix this." "Fix this?" I repeated, incredulous. "Mom, did you see what William did to Jessica?" "I saw you make a scene and embarrass your stepfather in front of 300 people, she replied. "Whatever William said, I'm sure he didn't mean to hurt Jessica's feelings. You know how he gets when he's trying to honor family tradition." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, he looked my wife in the eye and told her she wasn't family. He excluded her from a gift ceremony because she doesn't have Mitchell blood. How is that honoring tradition?" "David, you're being dramatic. William has always been generous with Jessica. He paid for her birthday dinner last year. He paid for one dinner," I interrupted, "and then spent the entire evening talking about business with my brothers while Jessica sat there being ignored. That's not generosity, Mom. That's tolerance. And barely that." There was a long pause. "Your stepfather raised you like his own son. He put you through college. He gave you a job at the company. He's been nothing but good to you. And this is how you repay him? By standing up for my wife? By refusing to let her be humiliated? Yes, Mom. This is exactly how I repay cruelty and disrespect. You're throwing away your family for a girl you've known for 3 years." I looked at Jessica, who was watching me with wide, hurt eyes. "I'm not throwing away my family, Mom. I'm defining what family actually means. And if you can't understand the difference, then maybe we need to have a longer conversation about this when I get back." I hung up before she could respond. Your family thinks I'm not worth defending," Jessica said quietly. "Some of them do," I admitted, "but not all of them. And the ones who do think that way, well, maybe it's time I learned who my real family is." Over the next hour, the messages continued pouring in. My brother Michael sent a long text defending William and telling me I was acting like a spoiled brat. My uncle Robert called me ungrateful and disrespectful. Several cousins weighed in, most of them taking William's side. But there were other messages too. My cousin Sarah texted, "What William did was horrible. Jessica deserves so much better. You did the right thing." My grandmother, my biological father's mother, called to say she was ashamed of how William treated that sweet girl and that she supported whatever decision Jessica and I made. Most surprisingly, my brother James called around midnight. "I've been thinking about what happened tonight," he said without preamble. "And I keep coming back to this. If William had done that to my wife Amy, I would have punched him in the face." "James, no. Let me finish. I was so caught up in the moment, in the excitement of getting an expensive watch, that I didn't really process what was happening to Jessica. But I've been replaying it in my head, and David, what he did was fucked up. Really fucked up." I felt a surge of relief. James was William's favorite. If anyone was going to defend him, it would be my older brother. "Amy's been crying since we got home," James continued. "She keeps saying she should have stood up for Jessica, that she should have said something. We all just sat there and watched while William humiliated your wife on your wedding day." "It's not your fault," I said. "Nobody knew how to react. That's bullshit, and you know it. We knew it was wrong. We just didn't have the courage to do anything about it. You did." The conversation with James gave me hope that maybe not everyone in my family had lost their moral compass. But it also made me realize how deep the divide was going to be. When we returned from our abbreviated honeymoon 3 days later, we'd cut it short by 4 days to deal with the family crisis. The battle lines had been clearly drawn. William had spent the past 3 days conducting what could only be described as a campaign against Jessica and me. He'd called every family member, every family friend, every business associate who'd been at the wedding. His version of events painted him as a loving father figure, trying to honor family tradition, and me as an ungrateful son who'd been manipulated by a gold-digging wife into betraying the family that raised him. The stories he was telling were getting more elaborate and more divorced from reality with each retelling. By the time they got back to me through various family members, Jessica had apparently demanded a watch, caused a scene when she didn't get one, and had somehow manipulated me into humiliating William in front of our guests. But William had made one crucial mistake in his campaign. He'd forgotten that several people at the wedding had recorded the gift ceremony on their phones. My cousin Sarah was the first to show me the video footage. "Uncle William can spin this however he wants," she said, "but the video doesn't lie." She was right. The video clearly showed Jessica politely asking about the apparent oversight, William's cruel response, and my measured reaction to his behavior. There was no way to watch that footage and conclude that Jessica had done anything wrong or that my response had been disproportionate. Armed with this evidence, I decided it was time to end William's misinformation campaign. I called a family meeting at my grandmother's house, my biological father's mother, who had always been neutral ground in family disputes. I specifically invited everyone who had been at the wedding and had heard William's version of events. 23 people showed up, including William and my mother. The tension in my grandmother's living room was thick enough to cut with a knife. "I called this meeting," I began, "because there seems to be some confusion about what happened at my wedding reception. Rather than continue to let rumors and half-truths circulate, I thought we should all watch what actually happened and let everyone draw their own conclusions." I connected my laptop to my grandmother's television and played the video. The room was silent as they watched William exclude Jessica from the gift ceremony. Silent as they heard his cruel words about blood family only. Silent as they witnessed Jessica's humiliation and my response. When the video ended, the silence continued for a long moment. Finally, my Uncle Robert cleared his throat. "Well," he said uncomfortably, "I think we can all agree that this was just a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion." "A misunderstanding?" I repeated. "Uncle Robert, what part of that video was unclear to you?" "William was trying to honor family tradition," my cousin Tyler chimed in. "The Mitchell legacy has always been about blood family. It's nothing personal against Jessica." "Nothing personal?" Jessica spoke for the first time since we'd arrived. Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling slightly. "Tyler, he looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't family. On my wedding day, in front of 300 people. How is that not personal?" "You have to understand," my mother said. "William comes from a generation where these distinctions mattered. He doesn't mean any disrespect." "He doesn't mean disrespect?" I stood up, my patience finally exhausted. "Mom, listen to yourself. You're watching video evidence of him deliberately excluding and humiliating Jessica, and you're still making excuses for him." William, who had been unusually quiet throughout the meeting, finally spoke up. "I've built this family's legacy over 40 years, he said, his voice cold and controlled. "I've provided for everyone in this room at some point or another. I've earned the right to honor that legacy however I see fit." "You've earned the right to be cruel?" my grandmother asked. She was 84 years old, barely 5 feet tall, but her voice carried the authority of someone who had raised 6 children and buried 2 husbands. "William, I've known you for 15 years, and I've never seen you be deliberately unkind to anyone. What you did to that girl was beneath you." William's face flushed red. "With all due respect, Eleanor, this is a Mitchell family matter." "No," my grandmother replied firmly. "This is a human decency matter, and as the oldest person in this room, I'm telling you that what you did was wrong." The room erupted into chaos. Half the family started talking at once, some defending William, others supporting my grandmother. Voices were raised, accusations were flying, and 30 years of family resentments were suddenly being aired in public. Through it all, William sat in stony silence, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on some point on the wall behind my head. Finally, I'd had enough. "Enough!" I shouted, loud enough to cut through the arguing. The room fell silent. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen. This family is tearing itself apart rather than admit that one person did something wrong. I looked directly at William. "It's been more than 48 hours, William. I gave you a clear choice. Apologize to my wife or lose us both. You've chosen to wage a campaign against us instead. So let me make this very simple for everyone." I stood up and took Jessica's hand. "Anyone who wants to defend William's behavior, anyone who thinks what he did was acceptable, anyone who believes that family legacy is more important than basic human kindness, you're welcome to choose his side. But understand that by doing so, you're choosing not to have Jessica and me in your lives." I paused, looking around the room at faces I'd known since childhood. "And anyone who understands that what William did was wrong, that Jessica deserves better, that family is supposed to be about love and acceptance, you're welcome in our lives anytime." "You can't make us choose sides," my mother protested. "I'm not making you choose sides, Mom. William already did that when he decided to publicly humiliate my wife rather than welcome her into the family. I'm just making the consequences of that choice clear." William finally stood up, his face a mask of cold fury. "Fine," he said. "If that's how you want it, David, then that's how it'll be. But don't come crawling back when you realize what you've thrown away. Don't expect any help from this family when things get tough. Don't expect to inherit anything from the Mitchell legacy you're so eager to reject." "I don't want anything from you, William," I replied calmly. "I never did. All I wanted was for you to treat my wife with basic respect." Apparently that was too much to ask. He walked toward the door, then turned back. "You'll regret this decision for the rest of your life." "The only thing I regret," I said, "is that it took me this long to see who you really are." William left, and about half the room followed him. My mother lingered for a moment, looking torn between loyalty to her husband and love for her son. "David," she said quietly, "please reconsider. Please don't let this destroy our family." "Mom," I said gently, "I'm not destroying anything. I'm just refusing to pretend that destroying someone else is acceptable. If you can't understand that, then maybe we need some time apart too." She left without another word, tears in her eyes. When the dust settled, Jessica and I were left with my grandmother, my cousin Sarah, my brother James and his wife Amy, and two of my younger cousins who had always been closer to my generation than to William's. "Well," my grandmother said with a slight smile, "I guess we know who the real family is now." The next few months were difficult. The family was split almost evenly down the middle. Holiday plans were complicated by the fact that half the family refused to be in the same room with the other half. Business relationships were strained. Old friendships were tested. William launched a final offensive about 3 months after the wedding. He somehow got hold of Jessica's work schedule and showed up at the hospital where she worked, demanding to speak with her about resolving this misunderstanding. Jessica called me in tears from the hospital break room. "He cornered me in the parking garage," she said. "He kept saying that this was all a big misunderstanding, that he never meant to hurt my feelings, that he wants to work things out for the sake of family unity." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that if he wanted to work things out, he could start by apologizing for humiliating me at my own wedding. And he said..." She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "He said that he'd already been more than generous by even acknowledging his mistake, and that expecting an actual apology was unrealistic." That night, I drove to William's office. He was working late, as usual, alone in his corner office overlooking downtown Portland. When I walked in without knocking, he looked up from his computer with surprise and then annoyance. "David, I suppose Jessica called you crying about our conversation today. She called me upset because you ambushed her at her workplace after being told to stay away from us." "I was trying to fix things," William said, leaning back in his leather chair. "I was trying to be the bigger person and extend an olive branch." "An olive branch?" I laughed bitterly. "William, you told my wife that expecting an apology for public humiliation was unrealistic. How is that an olive branch?" I acknowledged that there was a misunderstanding. "What more do you want?" I stared at him for a long moment, finally understanding that this man was never going to change. He was never going to see Jessica as fully human, never going to recognize that his behavior had been cruel, never going to prioritize kindness over his own ego. "I want you to stay away from my wife," I said quietly. "I want you to stop calling my family members trying to turn them against us. I want you to stop spreading lies about what happened at our wedding. And I want you to understand that if you ever approach Jessica again, if you ever show up at her workplace or our home, I will call the police and file a restraining order." William's eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." We stared at each other for a long moment, two men who had once cared about each other but now saw only an enemy across the desk. "You know," William said finally, "I used to be proud of you. I used to think I'd raised a son who understood loyalty, who understood what family meant. I was wrong." "You were wrong about a lot of things," I replied. "But the biggest thing you were wrong about was thinking that fear and obligation were the same thing as love and respect." I turned to leave, but paused at the door. "For what it's worth, William, I did love you. For 15 years, I considered you my father, but fathers protect their children's happiness. They don't destroy it to prove a point." That was the last conversation William and I ever had. 1 year later, Jessica and I bought a house in Seattle. We'd both gotten new jobs, better jobs, and we were building a life surrounded by people who actually valued kindness over tradition, love over bloodlines, inclusion over exclusion. My grandmother moved to Seattle 6 months after we did. This is where the real family is now. she told my mother when explaining her decision to sell her Portland house. James and Amy visit us regularly. Sarah comes up from California every few months. Even my mother has started calling occasionally, though she's never fully reconciled with my decision to cut William out of our lives. The Mitchell business empire started crumbling about 18 months after our wedding. Without my financial management skills, I'd been handling the books for 5 years before the wedding, and without James, who quit 6 months after I did, William struggled to maintain the complex network of properties and investments that had made the family fortune. He was forced to sell the vacation home in Aspen, then the family ranch, then finally the downtown office building that had been his pride and joy. We heard through my grandmother that he'd moved to a smaller house, that he'd laid off most of his employees, that the mighty Mitchell Development Company was now essentially a one-man operation running out of a rented office space. "Do you feel bad for him?" Jessica asked me one evening as we sat on our porch overlooking Puget Sound. I thought about it for a moment. I feel bad that he chose pride over family. I feel bad that he's alone, but I don't feel bad about the consequences of his choices. He had multiple opportunities to make this right, and he chose his ego every single time. "Your cousin Tyler called today," she said. "He wanted to know if we'd consider coming to Christmas dinner this year. Apparently, William won't be there." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? What did you tell him?" I told him we'd think about it. But honestly, David, I'm not sure I'm ready to be around people who spent a year making excuses for cruelty. "We don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with," I assured her. "Our real family is right here. Everyone else, well, they're welcome to earn their way back into our lives if they want to put in the effort." 2 years after our wedding, we received some unexpected news. My cousin Sarah called to tell us that William had suffered a major heart attack and was in intensive care. "He's asking for you," she said. "The doctors aren't sure he's going to make it, and he keeps saying he needs to talk to David." Jessica and I talked about it for hours. Part of me felt obligated to go. Despite everything, William had been a father figure for 15 years of my life. But a larger part of me wondered if this was just another manipulation, another attempt to control the narrative and force a reconciliation on his terms. In the end, we decided to go. William looked smaller in the hospital bed, older and frailer than I remembered. The machines keeping him alive beeped steadily in the background as Jessica and I entered his room. "David," he said weakly when he saw me. "You came. Sarah said you wanted to talk." He nodded, struggling to find the words. "I've been thinking about what happened, about what I said to Jessica." I waited, not sure what to expect. "I was wrong," he said finally, the words coming out like they physically hurt him. "I was cruel. I let my pride, my stupid pride, destroy the best thing that ever happened to this family." He turned to Jessica, his eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry for what I did to you. You didn't deserve that. You never deserved any of it." Jessica was quiet for a long moment, then stepped closer to his bed. "Thank you for saying that," she said softly. "It means more than you know." "I lost everything," William continued. "The business, the properties, half my family. And for what? Because I couldn't admit that a woman who loves my son, who makes him happy, who brings joy into our lives, because I couldn't admit that she belonged with us." He looked back at me. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that you were right about everything. And I'm proud of you for standing up for your wife when I failed to welcome her." William died 3 days later. The funeral was awkward, filled with family members who hadn't spoken to each other in 2 years. But something had shifted. Maybe it was William's deathbed apology, or maybe it was just the passage of time. But the anger that had divided our family seemed to have mellowed into a kind of sad understanding. My mother approached Jessica and me after the service. "I owe you both an apology," she said. "I should have stood up for you from the beginning. I was so afraid of losing William that I forgot what was actually important." "We all made mistakes, Mom," I said, hugging her. "The important thing is that we learn from them." Over the next few months, the family slowly began to heal. Not everyone was ready to fully reconcile. Some of William's strongest supporters still blamed Jessica and me for destroying the family unity. But enough people were willing to admit that defending cruelty had been wrong, that excluding Jessica had been indefensible, that we were able to rebuild some semblance of family relationships. 3 years after our wedding, Jessica and I welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Eleanor after my grandmother. The baby shower was attended by a mix of both our families, including several relatives who hadn't spoken to us since the wedding incident. Watching my mother hold her granddaughter, seeing the joy on Jessica's face as she was surrounded by people who truly loved and accepted her, I realized that we'd ultimately won something much more valuable than any argument or family conflict. We'd won the right to define family on our own terms. We'd created a circle of love based on kindness, acceptance, and mutual respect. We'd built something better than what we'd lost. "Do you ever regret standing up to him?" Jessica asked me one evening as we watched Eleanor sleep in her crib. "Never," I said without hesitation. The only thing I regret is that it took me so long to realize that defending you shouldn't have been a choice. It should have been instinct. She smiled and leaned against me. I love you, David Mitchell. I love you too, Jessica Mitchell. And I promise you, our daughter will grow up in a family where love isn't conditional, where acceptance isn't earned, where being family means something real. Looking back now, I realize that William's cruelty at our wedding was actually a gift in disguise. It forced me to choose between enabling bad behavior and standing up for what was right. It taught me the difference between family loyalty and family accountability. It showed me who my real family was, not the people who shared my blood, but the people who shared my values. Our marriage is stronger because we faced that crisis together. Our family is healthier because we refuse to accept dysfunction as normal. Our daughter will grow up understanding that love is a choice, that kindness is non-negotiable, and that real family is built on respect, not biology. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm holding Eleanor and watching Jessica sleep, I think about William's final words to me, that he was proud of me for standing up for my wife. It took him 2 years and a deathbed confession to understand what I learned that night at our wedding reception. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to let them be cruel. Update. 5 years later, I'm writing this update because so many people have messaged me asking how things turned out, and because I think our story might help others who are facing similar family conflicts. Jessica and I now have 2 children. Eleanor is 4, and her little brother, William. Yes, we named him after my stepfather, a decision that surprised everyone, including us, just turned 2. We live in a beautiful house overlooking the water. We both have careers we love, and we're surrounded by people who genuinely care about us. The family dynamics have stabilized into something healthier than what existed before the wedding incident. We have regular contact with about half of my extended family, limited contact with another quarter, and no contact with the remaining quarter, who still believe that what William did was acceptable. My mother remarried last year to a wonderful man named Robert who treats Jessica like his own daughter. She's become an amazing grandmother to our children and has never once made Jessica feel like an outsider. James and Amy moved to Seattle 2 years ago, and our kids are growing up together as cousins should. Sarah visits us every holiday. My grandmother lived to see both her great-grandchildren born and passed peacefully last year at the age of 88. The most surprising development has been my relationship with some of William's strongest supporters. Time and perspective have a way of changing people's minds, and several family members who initially defended his behavior have reached out to apologize over the years. My cousin Tyler, who was one of William's most vocal defenders, called me last Christmas. "I've been thinking about what happened at your wedding a lot lately," he said. "My daughter just got engaged, and I keep imagining how I'd feel if someone treated her fiancé the way Uncle William treated Jessica. I would have done exactly what you did." These conversations have been healing in ways I didn't expect. They've helped me understand that good people can sometimes make bad choices when they're caught up in family loyalty or tradition. The key is being willing to admit when you're wrong and make amends. As for William's legacy, the Mitchell Development Company folded completely about 3 years ago. The family properties were all sold to pay debts. The legacy he was so determined to protect by excluding Jessica ultimately died with him. But here's the irony. Our children will carry the Mitchell name forward with pride. Not because of real estate empires or business success, but because they're being raised to understand that the Mitchell name represents kindness, inclusion, and standing up for what's right. Eleanor already shows signs of being a fierce protector of anyone she perceives as being treated unfairly. Just last week, she told a boy at preschool that he couldn't play with her blocks unless he let the new girl play too. "Everyone gets to play," she announced with 4-year-old authority. That's what families do. I've never been prouder of anything in my life. People often ask me if I think I overreacted to what William did. My answer is always the same. I reacted exactly as much as the situation required. Jessica deserved to be defended. She deserved to have someone stand up for her when she was being mistreated. She deserved to know that her husband would choose her over comfort, over tradition, over keeping the peace. And our children deserve to grow up seeing that love means protecting the people you care about, not enabling the people who hurt them. The watch William gave me that night sits in a box in our bedroom closet. I've never worn it. Sometimes I think about selling it, but somehow it seems more appropriate to keep it as a reminder. Not of family legacy or tradition, but of the moment I learned what kind of husband and father I wanted to be. Jessica sometimes asks if I miss the way things used to be before the family split apart, and honestly, I don't. What I miss is the illusion that our family was closer than it actually was. What I miss is the naive belief that people I loved would never choose cruelty over kindness. But I don't miss walking on eggshells around William's ego. I don't miss watching Jessica try to earn acceptance that should have been freely given. I don't miss pretending that dysfunction was normal or that love was conditional. Our family is smaller now, but it's real. Our relationships are built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Our children are growing up in an environment where they don't have to earn their place or prove their worth. And Jessica? She's thriving. She was promoted to head nurse in the pediatric intensive care unit last year. She's beloved by her colleagues, adored by her patients' families, and treated with the respect and admiration she's always deserved. She never again has to sit in a room wondering if she belongs. To anyone reading this who might be facing a similar situation, trust your instincts. If someone is treating your spouse badly, if family members are making excuses for cruelty, if you're being asked to choose between keeping the peace and protecting the person you love, choose love. Every single time. It might cost you relationships, it might create conflict, it might force you to rebuild your understanding of what family means, but it will also show you who your real family is. And that knowledge is worth everything. Edit, thank you to everyone who has shared their own stories in the comments. It's both heartbreaking and inspiring to see how many people have faced similar situations. For those asking about the legal aspects, yes, we did end up having to get a restraining order against William about 6 months after the wedding when his attempts to reconcile became harassment. It was never enforced because he backed off after being served with the papers, but having it in place gave Jessica peace of mind at work. For those asking about inheritance, William left everything to his biological children, as expected. We never wanted anything from him anyway. The real inheritance our children will receive is the knowledge that they come from a family that chooses love over legacy, kindness over tradition, and inclusion over exclusion. And finally, for those saying I should have handled it privately instead of making a scene at the wedding, I respectfully disagree. William chose to humiliate my wife publicly. The only appropriate response was to defend her publicly. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let cruelty happen in silence. So Reddit, what do you think? 5 years later, do you still think I handled this correctly? Would you have done anything differently? I'm curious to hear from people who have faced similar family conflicts. How did you handle them? And what would you do differently if you could go back?